My name's Zev Tiefenbach. I arrived in Montreal, I think around 1997, and always had an interest in food politics and food. And so my early involvement at Concordia, when I first arrived, I got a job right away at Le Frigo Vert as the education coordinator. So that would have been September '97. And it was a great little organic food co-op. Even before I moved to Montreal, I visited Le Frigo Vert and thought, okay, that's where I want to end up. That's where I'm really excited to be. And so to me, that was my entrance into the university world. It was my entrance to Montreal, and it was my entrance to food politics in Montreal. And we were really having a lot of fun at the time. At Le Frigo Vert, the year I was working there, we introduced bulk bins. And that was really, really exciting. So the store was expanding. And there was an emerging community of people who were really excited about good food, who were excited about the culture of good food, learning more about food and how to feed themselves well. A lot of, it's funny how these movements work, but at that time there were a lot of really great people from the dance program who were really interested in food and nutrition and had an understanding of the politics. So Le Frigo Vert had this very strong influence or strong following from the dance community and the dance students. So a lot of the board of directors were made up of people from the dance department. Helen Simard, Amy Henderson, two that I remember well. And we did fun stuff like having workshops on making seed milks and nut milks and how to make tofu and a lot of stuff around women's health too. So we were really excited and interested in talking about the keeper and menstrual stuff. And so that was a great little hub. And we had a ordering group where every week you put in your orders for organic produce and we would deliver it and sort it and distribute it to people. In the subsequent years, the Frigo Vert had a little bit of a waning of influence and importance. And by 1999, the Le Frigo Vert was having some difficulties, some trouble. And I was still really interested in food politics and food in general and cooking. And so there's a whole culmination of things that started to happen that resulted in the formation of the People's Potato. So that's really, in terms of food politics and my role at Concordia, the formation of the People's Potato. Myself and a few other individuals founded the People's Potato and pushed to make it a reality on campus. And there's a lot of side projects associated with the People's Potato, but really in 1999, we embarked upon creating the People's Potato. And I guess, sitting here in the kitchen, how many years later, 16 years later, it's pretty neat to still be in the same kitchen that we worked in and to see the culture of it still alive and happening. So that's pretty exciting.
Great. So could you recount the history of the People's Potato from when it was founded until you left Concordia?
Right. I think that the genesis of the People's Potato in practicality was in September 1999. We had a radical executive of the CSU, and they were hosting a conference called, I think, Activism in the Age of Neoliberalism, or Activism in the Age of Imperialism. And they brought in people from all over the place. It was out at Loyola, and it was a big deal. I think Tom Kiefer was instrumental in organizing that. He was a VP external, I think, or something like that. And I was in Mile End going about my business on a day, probably at the end of August, and I ran into Rob Green, who was the president of the CSU at the time, and he said, Zev, hey, I wanted to talk to you. We're having this conference and we need it catered. And I had a background in doing a lot of the food service around in the radical community, progressive community. QPERG would have their retreats every year, and I would usually cater them. So I was known as a cook who did a lot of large-scale cooking around, and I thought, wow, that's an interesting gig. So I think I was contracted to do 300 300 meals times 3, so three meals a day times 300 servings for 3 or 4 days. And I thought, okay, that's great. So I put together a little team of people, and I inherited a team of people. The person who was going to do the food service for that event bailed out, but they had a group of people who were going to volunteer to do it. So I took them on. And over the course of those 3 or 4 days, we had a lot of fun. And a group of us that worked together just had a blast together. And we kind of left that catering event thinking, geez, how can we do this again? And part of our budget for that catering event, we bought some really big pots and pans, especially the big pots. We started to really dwell on those pots and thinking, how can we restructure our lives to do this every day? And concurrent to that, one of the fellows who worked with us there, Mike Barkey, he was really interested in the university infrastructure, and he liked to kind of root around the building and look and explore. And he came up here to the 7th floor and said, Zev, you gotta see this. There's like a football field of equipment up there. Like it's incredible how much food we could make if we had this equipment up there. And I came up here and thought, oh God, yeah, this is incredible. I mean, we could feed like half of Montreal from this kitchen up here. And that was in the back of our minds too, this idea of like shifting food production into the hands of the people, like using a space that's public. This is Concordia University. It's paid for by public money, and saying, how can we use public spaces for the public utility? And we felt really compelled by that idea. And at the same time, within the CSU, we had this radical climate of saying, no to corporate food, no to Sodexo. And people at that time were talking about Sodexo's involvement in the military-industrial complex. And people didn't like the monopoly that Sodexo had in the context of the university. So these things were all sort of coming together, and we started to really think, hey, this could be really, really, really neat to try to do this every day. So Mike and we brought in a few other people. My cousin Janice Tiefenbach was involved. Another woman, Jan Rasso, was involved. These were art students. Laura Berzati, another art student, said, yeah, let's do this. And my cousin Janice was really instrumental in creating an artistic aesthetic around it. But we all were really committed to cooking and doing a lot of cooking. And Mike Barkey, at the time, lived at the Benedict Arnold House. And so he used to do food runs. So he was familiar with Premier Moison and the food banks and did pickups for them. And he thought, well, I could probably do pickups for our own food service. And he went around to some of the different churches and got donations and got some money that way. We got lots of dishes. And people were really excited because around here there's a lot of churches that aren't used, and they have this ethic of service, but there's no energy to do it. So we really tapped into this. People were so excited to give these young people the tools to make this happen. And there was money coming to us to buy our equipment, and there was all these plates and cutlery and stuff. And so we set up a kitchen at the Erskine and American Church across the street from the university. And they were so happy for us to take that over as our home. And we set all this stuff up. And then in December, we had this launch in the basement of Reggie's where we just had this huge potluck. And we wanted to bring the Frigo Vert on board too, and try to create this sort of resurgence in food politics and energy. The Frigo Vert at the time was run by a Dutch fellow named Ben, and he was a great manager of the Frigo Vert, but he wasn't connected to the university community, and it was sort of becoming something separate, and it wasn't doing well financially, didn't have a volume, and it wasn't growing, and it wasn't very popular. So we just wanted to try to bring these things together and bring people together collectively and eat meals together. So then in January, we started in earnest, and we had our kitchen at the Erskine American Church. We brought the food over every day, steaming hot pots across the street, across Sherbrooke, into the basement of Reggie's. There would be a huge lineup out the door when we'd arrive with the food. And we felt like, yeah, this is really, really great. We felt we were bringing really great food to people. We were people eating together in this really tight, cramped corridors. It became a hotbed for being able to mobilize people, and their political speeches every day. I think before I ever served a meal, every day that I served a meal, I would proselytize. I could say that word; it'd be good. But there'd be a lot of political talk, a lot of political organizing out of that space, and so that it was really, really beautiful. And part of our vision too wasn't just to be at the Erskine American Church, but was to try to bring together. We wanted to build a movement, and we tried to get the university involved in different ways, and we had a lot of success, and we spent a lot of energy navigating the university infrastructure to find the pockets of support and sympathy for us. So at certain points, I mean, we were out in the community as well, so we were going to all the fruiteries along St. Catherine to try to find their surplus food, to bring it into our kitchen. And at one point, we made enough contacts within distribution services that they were doing a truck run for us and showing up at the back door of the church and unloading for us the food. We made contacts. Jacques Saint-Amour was the guy who ran custodial services, and he said, "What do you need? You need cleaning supplies? Sure, come and get what you need." And so we were making these contacts. We were trying to build this sense of ownership over this project. We also, really important to the whole ethic of everything that we did was the history and background of Food Not Bombs. More than anything, that informed our work. I'd always volunteered with Food Not Bombs in various cities, Toronto, San Francisco, Victoria, wherever I had been previous in my life. And the lessons of Food Not Bombs are deeply ingrained in me and my ethic, but we wanted to recuperate. We wanted to serve this vegan food that was healthy and nutritious and fully accessible to everybody. And we wanted to build coalition and build a movement. So not only do we serve every day at Concordia, but every time there was a squat that opened up, we would be at the squat and we would serve. Every time there was a major demonstration, we wanted to be there to serve food, to strengthen our movements, to strengthen radical politics in the city, to strengthen the student movement and the student strikes. Anytime we felt like we needed a lot of people at an event, we would serve at that event and people would be there. So it was great for us to be able to mobilize and great for us to create a culture of sharing, of working together. And I think the biggest thing for me anyway, and all of us was sitting back and thinking about what the possibilities are. Just saying, okay, there's this really embedded corporate culture within our university structure. All the liberal arts are being wiped out. All the natural sciences are being wiped out. There's such an emphasis on corporate research funding within the university structure. But how can we take some of that space back? How can we go back in there and say, no. The buck stops here. We live in a neoliberal world. Paul Martin's our prime minister, but we're going to take back our university, and it's possible. And we saw it just not being our universities, but look at food service in hospitals, right? You have the most vulnerable people eating garbage provided by corporate service providers. So we saw this as being like, let's do it in one place first, and just do it so that we know that it can be done. We can take over a food service within a university. We can take over this massive investment that this public institution has put into this food service equipment and bring it back to the people in the most simple, straightforward way and provide them food. And it was cheap and it was easy to do. We put a lot of work into it, but it worked. And the funding wasn't extensive of what we needed. And so I was really excited. We were really motivated by retaking this public space and saying, let's create different models for how our public institutions react and work with the constituencies that live with and are serviced by those institutions.
And this has been described to me by many people, but I'd like to hear from you.
Yeah.
I know that there's quite a relationship between the spaces that you guys occupied and the services also. Now, I was told by people that you didn't necessarily have access to this, that it had to be squatted at first. I don't necessarily know the truth behind that, so maybe you could shed light on how the spaces actually were part of the whole process also.
Right. Okay, that's great. Are we rolling?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, that the space where we started was the Erskine American Church, and there was a lot of solace in that space. We really enjoyed working in that space. It's a beautiful space, and there was a gym upstairs, a basketball court, so we could shoot hoops to blow off some steam. We had our meetings there, and we really liked being away from the university. There were a lot of intense university politics, and we, the people who founded the People's Potato, we were an autonomous worker-run collective, and we felt like it was really important for us to have our own space, to have control over what we were doing. The CSU at the time were tremendous allies, but they also had an agenda, and it wasn't an agenda that we necessarily always wanted to endorse. Their methodology wasn't the way we always wanted to work, and so we really wanted to always be clear that we were 100% autonomous. The people who made the decisions about how the service was operated were the people who were working, the workers in that collective, and that was our organizational methodology. So being separate from the university was very valuable. But we had problems. So in January 2000, when we started the food service, it was really cold in Montreal. And this kitchen at the Erskine and American Church had a domestic fridge, and that's where we stored our produce, or some of our produce. That's where we stored the more perishable stuff, but the majority of our produce, and we would probably be going through in the ballpark of 700 or 800 pounds of produce a week, was stored in the pantry. And when it was very cold, we would crack the window open a little bit. And when it was less cold, we would crack the window a lot. And obviously, you know, for food service purposes, we're looking to try to achieve a temperature between 0 degrees and 4 degrees Celsius. And based on how much we opened the window, we would try to achieve that. By March 2000, we were no longer able to keep our produce cold. And we had literally hundreds of pounds of rotting produce in this pantry. And we actually stopped service for a week in March. We said, we can't keep going. We have these structural problems. And at the time, the service became really popular. There's basically every issue of the Link or the Concordian talked about us and what we were doing and why it was so exciting. And you know, our lineups were out the door. We were feeding 250, 300 people every day. And we just didn't have the access to the refrigeration anymore to be able to continue. It was a real impediment. And we had other issues too, like Java U existed. We were serving in the basement below Reggie's, and we needed to wash all those dishes. And we were washing all the dishes in the Java U kitchen there. And it was out of the kindness of the owners of Java U to let us use that space, and we really used that space. And that was excellent and great, and we stored some of the dishes there and stuff like that. But so we were always we were managing a lot of different spaces, and we were putting a lot of energy into carting things around to different places. So, but we were willing and we were happy to do that. But the key thing that happened to us was the refrigeration. So at the time, the CSU had a general manager who was Rick Stamm, and he was, let's say, a very able or very persuasive individual in terms of dealing with the university administration. And on our behalf, he demanded that the university give us one of their walk-in fridges here on the 7th floor, that they make that available for us. And the university agreed, responded to our crisis of shutting down by saying, sure, you can have one of these walk-in fridges. So that was great, and it resolved our problem. But it resulted in another complicated issue, which was that every morning we'd start at the Erskine and American Church at 7 o'clock or 7:30 or whatever time we were starting, and we would have to come up here into the university, 7th floor, load up carts and boxes of food from the fridge, bring it down to the ground floor, across back to the church, and then up. And it was really labor intensive. We did that from March until the end of our serving, which was at the end of May, or mid-May, I guess. But at that point, we really had to really think about what our service meant and what we were doing. And as a collective, we had some meetings and said, do we want to try to eke out some kitchen space on the 7th floor? And we were really conflicted because there was a lot of sanctuary in an emotional way, because what we were doing was really hard. We were working really long hours, and there was a lot of infighting and challenges working within the CSU, as supportive as they were. But the CSU was at loggerheads with the university administration. And so there was just a lot of tension in general, a lot of tension around the student politics between left-wing factions and right-wing factions within the student governance systems. There were factions between the CASA the Commerce and Administration Student Association, the Engineering and Computer Sciences Student Association. They were trying to separate from the CSU. There were all these different kinds of alignments and fighting going on, and we really liked being able to disappear to our space where we were wholly welcome. And so we had some difficult collective meetings about what to do. We also talked about the idea of trying to raise funds to do a major renovation at the Erskine and American Church to accommodate ourselves as a kitchen. I think that space is being used for something else. I think the Musée des Beaux-Arts jumped in there and took over that space now. But and so we had some preliminary discussions about that, but ultimately we had to make. I mean, we all agreed with some sadness that we needed to relocate ourselves to the to the 7th floor, and that was also fitting with our dream, and me and Mike Barkey coming up here before the potatoes started, dreaming of taking over some of this industrial kitchen space, and so we set about doing that, and the university at that time was very open to it, and Sodexo was open to it, and Sodexo, ourselves, the CSU, and the administration reached an agreement that they would give us a portion of this kitchen, which was great. So then September 2000, we were cooking in this kitchen here. We weren't squatting it. We had full agreement from the university. They gave us a different walk-in fridge, the one that adjoins this kitchen, and that was the start of us using this kitchen in September 2000.
So could you explain to us what the original vision of the People's Potato was?
Yeah, that's complicated. There's I think a few pieces. I think one, we self-identified as a cooks collective. So we were a group of people that were really passionate about making food and good food and feeding people really good food. So that was a big piece of what we wanted to do. And being a workers-run collective meant that we were autonomous. So it was about a way of working where the workers are in control and make the decisions about the outcome of their work. So that was an important part. So a passion for cooking, an interest in organizing around a worker collective. But there was another piece that I think was really important and valuable to us, which was that we wanted to, I think implicitly, have a widespread radicalizing influence. We had an ethic of radical politics, but we wanted it to be able to be popularized. And there was a lot of talk and a lot of radicalization happening within the CSU, within the Montreal student movement at the time. But we, I think, wanted to try to draw people in a way that maybe seemed, at least on the outset, less subversive. And we thought that feeding people, or the result, or the act of feeding people, was something that was really easy to get a lot of people behind. You know, within the university administration, within the different kinds of student groups, and it was something that everybody could support. And I think that for us, you know, at the time when we started it, the CSU was fractured between different factions, the Commerce and Administration Student Association, the Engineering and Computer Science Administration, and we just kind of went in there and said, we want to feed all of you guys. You know, there are hungry students who are commerce students, and there are hungry students who are fine arts students, and we'll feed any of them. And you know, that there isn't a radical element to that, but what we wanted to do was draw people on board, get people excited about it. And I think implicit in what we did were the radical politics, but we wanted to make people feel like they wanted to support it and make it feel natural to them. This is what the politic that we're talking about looks like. This is how it functions. This is how it interacts with people. This is how it enriches our community. This is how it changes our university. This is how, when we engage our radical politics and roll up our sleeves and sweat, this is what it looks like. This is how it changes a community. So I remember at the time we wanted some funding, and we went to the CSU, and the CSU was extremely forthcoming with the funding. But I was also so curious about working with the Commerce and Administration Student Association, and they said, the president, whose name I don't remember right now, said, look, if you write a good budget and put together a business plan, we'll 100% support this. You tell us how much money you want, and we'll support you too. I thought, oh, cool. And for me, it was an opportunity to say, yeah, okay, I'll put together the business case for this, because that's how you want to see it. That makes perfect sense to me. And I put together a business plan for him. I said, this is how much it's going to cost us per meal. This is where we're going to spend our money, and this is what we're doing. Here you go. He said, great. And they were happy to fund us and support us. And I think that was really exciting. And it wasn't just the student associations. It was also throughout the university. We were really excited to work with people, and you know, it was our job not to see ourselves as isolated from the university, but to ingrain ourselves, to embed ourselves into the university. So when I would train new staff, I wouldn't say, okay, this is how we cook. That was an important part of it. But it was also important for us to know everybody in the university, what their jobs were, how the hierarchy of the university worked, who were sympathetic to our cause, who we could go to for favors. For example, the head of the planning committee, the head of campus planning, was a fellow named Rick Young. And he loved it. He loved the People's Potato. And he loved drawing out how we were going to cut this kitchen up in a way that made sense for Sodexo and made sense for us. And it was so easy because he was on board. And the fellow who was responsible for the renovations themselves to happen, what's his name? I don't remember his name. He was super enthusiastic. And throughout the university, there were administrators who were on board and helpful and believed in it. And we met with them and we cultivated relationships with them. Donald Boisvert was the Dean of Students. He was really excited and interested. Michael DeGrappa was the Vice Rector Services. He was involved and active, and we all had a rapport together because we were all working together. And while we had a radical undercurrent that was really important to us and how we organized and what our methodology was and what our political philosophy was, we were really happy to bring as many people along for that journey to change the university as we could. So we had allies throughout the university. When the Gazette would write about us, the university was super happy to be a supportive partner in those conversations and so on. So that was a really valuable and important part of what we were trying to do. You know, we reached an endpoint with the university where they were no longer willing to further our interests, where there was a dichotomy. And the dichotomy became very, very clear and became very, very confrontational. But up to that point, we had a fantastic working relationship with virtually every department in the university. You know, the accounting department was happy to train us on using the internal budget systems of the university. The university health and safety department was a little bit more difficult to deal with. I think the person who ran that department was Sue Magor. She was challenging to work with, but her subordinates were quite helpful and would say, look, you guys have to be sure that the temperatures in the fridge are this, and let's make sure that you have a proper system for your dishes and so on. So it was really good, I think, for us in terms of our whole philosophy to look at it as the building of a popular movement. And we had so many opportunities to create relationships and allies throughout that by the time years later we're working with trying to build the Concordia Kitchen Mosaic, which is a project that we didn't quite get off the ground, but was an exciting project to think about. We had allies in virtually every corner to work with us and build something that was quite exciting, or that felt like it was going to be really exciting.
So could you tell us about the People's Potato Garden, how that came about, and I guess the relationship between growing food and serving food in regards to the People's Potato?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that in terms of the People's Potato, especially at the onset of the project, we really had an expansionist ideology. We had this vision of this football field of industrial food service equipment, and we just had this idea of being able to grow. And so the natural effect of that was to grow some food too. To have a garden project, and we had an approach to the administration and said, hey, we'd love to set up a garden. And the original garden location, and it was again this feeling of goodwill, of collaboration within the university infrastructure. So the director of athletics at that time, don't remember his name, he was excited and he thought, well, what can I do? And he had a back part of the football field that wasn't being used, and they said, look, if you guys put in a fence, then you can have this garden space. And there were a bunch of the groundskeepers were Portuguese, and they were like, oh, this is beautiful. So they went around, they got tons of soil, they brought it over, they dumped it there for us and formed it into beds for us, these huge long beds. And it was really, really exciting. We put in this fence. And we hired a garden coordinator, and we started to grow the food. And then one day, the athletics coordinator walked by our garden in the back end there, and he said, "What are you guys growing? What's going on?" And we had tons of cover crop of clover. And he didn't like that at all. He just thought, well, you're going to kill my athletics fields here, people. So the next year we had to move the garden, but also for us, we really wanted to collaborate and work with people, and we understood that creating creative partnerships was very, very valuable. So at the time there was a very strong organization that worked out of NDG, which is where the Loyola campus was situated, called Eco Initiatives. And they had a Victory Garden sort of project. And so they had gardens spread out in people's backyards, and different people would farm it, and they would try to get as many volunteers as they could, and then they would collectivize the food and give it out and make meals together and so on that way too. So what we decided to do was we kind of entered into a partnership agreement with Eco Initiative so that our garden, the People's Potato Garden, became one of their garden sites that they operated in conjunction with us. I think we funded the position to coordinate that garden, and they managed that because we didn't have a management infrastructure in the summer, and brought in our volunteers and sort of connected it that way. And then we also had decided that we would try to get some greenhouse space on the 12th floor. And again, people were quite receptive to that and quite excited and interested to have us grow food there. So we grew a lot of the seedlings, not just for our own garden, but also for the whole Eco Initiatives network up there. And again, we're just looking at this facility and the incredible facilities that are public and saying, okay, how can we bit by bit take these things over and collectivize their use?
Okay, So could you describe to us Concordia's relationship with multinational food service providers?
Great. Yeah. So in 1997, when I came to Concordia, Sodexo Marriott was the corporate food service provider here. And I think at the time, people didn't like Sodexo. There were a lot of problems, student groups having to pay money to get jugs of water, and all catering had to go through them. So student groups wanting to host wine and cheeses and so on would have to go through Sodexo. And it wasn't the kind of food that they wanted to provide, but that the student groups didn't necessarily want to provide what Sodexo was able to give them. But more so, I think people were starting to say, how do we want to spend our money in an ethical way? And so we wanted to defy this monopoly. And I think for me, there was the CSU organized a cheese-in where they openly defied the monopoly that Sodexo had with the university, and they said this is unjust. It's not just that you can make the decision for all student organizations as to who we have to buy our food from, and the quality that would be reflected, and the value systems intrinsic in those purchases. So certainly, when we started the People's Potato, we were actually really excited to be openly defiant of the monopoly that Sodexo had. We said, screw it, we love the idea of serving the food we want to serve in this university. And to me, there was a really, really strong parallel again to Food Not Bombs, right? Where you had Food Not Bombs activists getting thrown in jail regularly, every day, for serving food, because it was their conviction that people should have access to quality food on the street, and that's an intrinsic right. It's an intrinsic right to have food, and it's also an intrinsic right to provide food. But it wasn't so much a problem for the university that we were doing the serving. We were also serving it in the basement of Reggie's, which was CSU space. So that was okay. But then CSU's contract, the university's contract with Sodexo expired, and they were looking for. How did it work? Sorry, I'm not actually clear here. They had it was up for tender, and that's where we were doing the Concordia Kitchen Mosaic. But I think Chartwell's came in before that, didn't they? No, it was Sodexo and then Chartwell's. There was only two. Okay. So let me double back then.
Yeah, no problem. Did you want to start from the beginning, or do you want to start from a certain spot?
So from a certain spot. Okay. I think I'll be familiar. So once Sodexo's contract, and we developed a strong working relationship with Sodexo out of the space. We knew who their chef was, and they were open to us, being neighbors. We had a good neighborly relationship. But when Sodexo's contract was up, and the university was putting out RFPs, requests for proposals, we really felt like it was time for us to make a move, to bring the whole project and the whole movement to another level, to say, actually, Concordia doesn't need another corporate food service provider. And I think also what was really important to me too was looking at the cafeteria here. The cafeteria had become extinct, which really makes sense because you live in a cosmopolitan city like Montreal, where you could, travel 3 minutes from the university and eat any kind of food you wanted that was cheap, decent, and there was a plethora of food choices for students. So students aren't coming to the cafeteria here eating bad burgers and fries. It just didn't happen. So the whole cafeteria element of it was finished. And I kind of thought, hey, it's time for us to look at a different model as to how we do this. What does a cafeteria look like in the 21st century in a public institution like this? And so at that point, we started to talk to a lot of different student organizations, and already we had an extremely strong relationship with the Arab Student Association. The MSA, the Muslim Student Association. And they would have enormous breaking fast meals during Ramadan, and they cooked out of our kitchen extensively. So we worked really, really closely with them every day through Ramadan. We kept things separate. They had their space in our kitchen, and we really valued working from them. And as cooks, we also really valued the experience because they had people from the community coming in. They had one woman who was Malaysian. She was kind of their main cook, and it was a really different fare of food. So we learned a lot from each other. And of course, because our kitchen was vegan, that really, and that was part of our rationale when we started. When we started, people were really critical. Why are you only serving vegan food? Like that's really exclusionary, right? And when we were trying to solicit support from different right-wing factions and saying, yeah, we serve this vegan food, they were really skeptical. But we were always really clear to point out, actually, this is the most inclusive kind of food that we can possibly serve. We meet every dietary restriction. If you're worried about kashrut and you're Jewish, you're going to be able to eat our food. If you're worried about halal food, then you're going to be able to eat our food. There's no alcohol, there's no taboos, there's food allergies, we minimize them. So we had a really inclusive sort of food value there in terms of being vegan. And that's why I don't think any of the members of our collective when we founded were actually vegan. In fact, I don't think any of us were, I'm pretty sure. But we were vegan to be as inclusive as possible in terms of our food service choices. But we were working very, very closely with the Muslim Student Association, and we had strong alliances with the Caribbean Student Association and other student groups on campus, lots of them who used our space in different times. Or at one point, Rosie Douglas, who was at the time the president of Dominica, came to visit Concordia, and he was very instrumental in the student riots, the computer riots. And we brought him back to welcome him back into the university space. But we fed him. So out of this kitchen, we fed a head of state, which was quite an extraordinary honor. But obviously the Caribbean Student Association was very involved in that event. So what we decided to do and what we started to really think was the new model for a 21st century kitchen or cafeteria in a public institution would be this mosaic concept. And we envisioned different student organizations being able to run their own kiosk to serve the food that they want to make. And they would be able to benefit from the proceeds of those foods. So the Caribbean Student Association could serve what they wanted to. The Hellenic Student Association could serve the food that they wanted to. The People's Potato would offer their fare free or by donation, and we would have a kind of a common area where people would buy drinks or desserts or whatever, and you'd go through this kiosk sort of system and buy your food. And so we proposed that to the university, and what we really wanted to do was to say, look, the RFP as it's designed guarantees us that we will not be able to win. We can't win the contract based on the RFP, the parameters of the RFP we've put together. So let's hold off on the RFP process. Here's our proposal. We want you to consider a proposal that would look like this, and then launch an RFP for what we don't want to do or what we can't provide. But let's have this negotiation first before the RFP goes out, before you start to do that. And actually, that's the place where we sort of hit the wall with the university, and the university was completely unwilling to receive this proposal and consider it, and they just said, well, put a bid in for the RFP if you like. And we at that point, used all of our precious taxes. And in the past, when we really wanted to get something, we would move our serving to Bishop's Court. The Gazette would be there, CTV would be there, it'd be a strong media event, and we'd say, hey, we're here serving today in front of Bishop's Court because of this, this, and this, and then the administration would say, yeah, we're really supportive of feeding students, and we're absolutely going to acquiesce to their demands. But in this circumstance, they were completely insular. They were completely not receptive to moving in that direction. They really liked us as a fringe organization that was able to give excellent PR to the university, to be written up in the Maclean's Best Of. It was written up in the alumni magazines. They were really proud of it, but they didn't want us to have access to the infrastructure of the university in a really, really meaningful way, in that way. We weren't able to mobilize beyond that. And that coincided with me, for me, sort of, I think at that point for me, the project personally had grown as much as it could grow, and that was the next natural conclusion, and we couldn't take it there. And that coincides more or less with the end of my involvement with the People's Potato. And at the time, the People's Potato was big. There were maybe 18 or 20 employees, as I had mentioned, and we were divided up into two sub-collectives. So we were the People's Potato as a whole collective, and then there was the People's Potato Serving Collective, the people who were responsible for the daily meals, and then there was the Community Economic Development Wing, and there were two separate sub-collectives within the main collective. So the Community Economic Development Wing would meet and we'd discuss our issues and how we were going to market our products and how we were going to be out there. And then the Serving Committee would just make sure that they'd schedule the kitchen for their daily feedings, and then we would have meetings together to discuss overarching policy and things like that. So it was quite big, but we were also able to, at that point, the People's Potato itself, the servings, were so self-sustaining. We really had a system, and it felt like at that point that feeding 350 people every day was pretty straightforward. So yeah, that's where we got.
So could you describe to us the history of the Frigo Vert, how it started and how it became what it is today?
Right. Well, I used to know a lot more about the history of the Frigo Vert, but really I think it's best for me to start in 1997 when I arrived there and got hired as the education coordinator. And that was a really beautiful little store, and it sold, very beautiful goods, and it was based in the idea of trying to have a meaningful relationship to product, trying to re-envision how a store is run and what a store means, and they did it in a really subtle and way that I felt was meaningful. Like, they had a very specific buying policy. That any product that they bring into the store, they do a certain amount of research to understand the genesis of the product, if it was tied to a larger corporate entity, if the product was actually healthy or not healthy. They were very, very careful not to bring in competing brands, right? There's no reason to have this brand but not that brand, or have 4 different kinds of soy milk. So they really wanted to have an austere but meaningful selection of goods, local if possible. So everything that was in the store was a deliberate reflection of a value system and a dialogue, because there was a group of people who would sit down and talk about it. What do we want to have in the store? And customers would write down on their list things that they would like to see the store bring in, and they would consider it and reflect on it, and they would group together this deliberate selection of products. Not so austere that you couldn't shop there. You could do your shopping there. And it was at a time in Montreal in 1997 where you couldn't get soy milk in the Provigo. Tofu wasn't common in Montreal supermarkets in 1997, as odd as that might seem now. And I had just moved from British Columbia, and so I noticed right away that Montreal was several years behind where BC was in terms of the food selections and the natural products. So it was really exciting to find this little enclave that really valued that. And we did things like supermarket tours to deconstruct what was going on in supermarkets. And it was a really, really exciting time there. And we were located at 2130 Mackay. I think it's still there, in a little storefront. And just down the street, Campus Ministry offered a Mother Hubbard's meal. And those two things were pretty neat. And then we had volunteers that worked with the Frigo Vert to come in and do baking. And we would sell our baked goods there. And it would always be very exciting when Brian, who was one fellow from the community, would come in and do his baked goods. And everybody would know which day he'd come in and bake and buy up his banana bread, his delicious vegan banana bread. And so it was a very small but engaged community. The produce ordering was done, so you put in your order on the Thursday, and on the Monday it would arrive, and we'd have a team of volunteers sorting it, and everyone would come and pick it up within the same period of time. So we all got to know each other, and it was very human, more than anything. It was managed as a store, though. There was a manager, and the manager reported to the board, and there was a very clear hierarchy. I was hired as the education coordinator, and I worked my till shifts, and there were very clear expectations about what I was supposed to do during my till shifts, and it ran like a store, most importantly. So that was in 97. I worked there September 97 until May 98. Thereafter, the Le Frigo Vert started to sort of stop becoming quite as relevant, and some of the board members moved on, the manager moved on, and in many ways it struggled to keep its clientele. We're still funded by the fee levy, so that subsidized the food and helped them do it, but more and more it struggled to keep its clientele and to keep its interest. So there was a sort of a shift that was happening away from Le Frigo Vert. So when we decided to launch the People's Potato in 1999, in fall 1999, we really wanted to try to enliven that community as well. So we actually offered it as a joint launch, and actually the very first meal that we served in December 99 as a big community introduction to the People's Potato that was going to start the following January, we cooked it at Le Frigo Vert's kitchens. We brought it from Le Frigo Vert into the basement of Reggie's where we were going to serve the food, and we really wanted to try to kickstart Le Frigo Vert at that time. And it didn't work. It didn't work. So the People's Potato became a thriving success. We had hundreds of volunteers, literally, and hundreds of people, and lining up for the food, and the distinction between the volunteers and the people who used the service was minimal. People knew to show up at our kitchen at 11:45 to bring these steaming pots of food across. People knew to come to our kitchen to volunteer there. But Le Frigo Vert continued to kind of operate under the radar. We ordered through Le Frigo Vert some of our goods, but it didn't really feed into the equation in the same way. And then in the summer of 2000, the manager at that time quit. He didn't want to continue, and there wasn't really a board. There were a few people who were left holding the reins of Le Frigo Vert, but they weren't people who felt like they wanted to re-energize it, let's say. So we kind of created a new board. We went out and found some people who would be interested in revitalizing Le Frigo Vert. There are a couple from Global Action Network, Andrew and Rebecca, for example. There was a local sort of celebrity chef, James Mays, and a few other people who from the community who said, yeah, this is an important institution, this is an important health food store, let's keep it alive, let's re-engage the board, let's hire a manager, we'll have a thorough hiring process. And so that was in through the summer of 2000, and by September 2000 they had a new manager in place, but there was a distinctive shift. And the manager who came in had a different expectation about what the store was and was going to be. So for the first time, Le Frigo Vert started to carry supplements and different kinds of pharmaceutical products, frozen and prepared meals. All these things were from a different ethic. This wasn't the ethic of the old Frigo Vert, this was a new ethic. They decided to get rid of the bulk bins, which had been a huge achievement for us in 1998 to acquire, being able to go from having maybe a selection of 150 products to adding another 100. We doubled our product line, and then we were carrying like bulk millet, bulk amaranth, bulk quinoa, bulk adzuki beans, bulk buckwheat groats, like all these beautiful products that actually to us were the core of what eating was, and teaching people how to cook and teaching people how to use these products. We were able to carry all of them, and it changed how we understood education at the store and all these things. So when they decided to get rid of the bulk bins at Le Frigo Vert, and another mandate that they adopted for that store was to become strictly vegan. And while the People's Potato was vegan, I think there were a lot of people in the community who looked at that and thought, well, okay, well, that used to be a place where I could get my local farm fresh eggs. And in Montreal at the time, that wasn't something that people were thinking about, but the people who were thinking about it, that was an enclave for them. So they lost, nice organic yogurt, they lost nice organic milk and nice organic cheeses and the organic eggs and these kinds of products that were meaningful to people. So it became a really different store. They spent a bunch of money and invested in a new alarm system, which was strange to us or to observers. But really, at that point, the thing that was really most noticeable and most characteristic of the change was the removal of the bulk bins. And out of the removal of the bulk bins came about the idea of having a Bolshevik revolution. And so what we did was we effectively approached the staff. And this was out of, I was working as an individual with the People's Potato and with the community that we were mobilizing and that we worked with. So there was a very, very strong, active contingent associated with the People's Potato, not just the collective itself, but also the community at large who understood what we were doing. And I'm going to take a step back and sort of explain a little bit how organizationally we were structured and how this Bolshevik revolution unfolded. So the People's Potato operated as the People's Potato, but we were actually self-identified as the Concordia Food Collective. And the Concordia Food Collective operated, or the People's Potato, which was the worker-run collective. So we kind of had this parent organization that was us, but we always envisioned the Concordia Food Collective being an umbrella for the People's Potato, which we operated, but other potential projects. So at that point, we developed the constitution of the Concordia Food Collective. And the constitution of the Concordia Food Collective was to be an organization, a not-for-profit organization that housed different project worker-run collectives that had a vision of radical food politics. So we approached the staff of Le Frigo Vert, and there were a number of outstanding, exciting, motivated staff members who were really disgruntled with the hierarchical structure and the overall direction, and really valued the idea of being an autonomous worker-run collective. And we mobilized a group of people who were generally interested in our project, the People's Potato, and the food security movement in general. And we petitioned Le Frigo Vert to have a special meeting. And in their constitution, it was prescribed that if a certain amount of members, and every Concordia student was a member of Le Frigo Vert, if they received a petition with a certain amount of signatures, they were required to hold a special meeting. So we petitioned to hold a special meeting, and at that special meeting, we had the board of Le Frigo Vert could consist of up to 12 people. So we had a full slate of 12 people who were the Bolsheviks, who were going to step up and say, yep, we're all running for board of director positions. The people who were on the previous board of Le Frigo Vert did not come to the special meeting. And so we elected a full slate of Bolsheviks to create a new Le Frigo Vert, a worker-run Le Frigo Vert that would be incorporated under the Concordia Food Collective as a sister organization to the People's Potato. So now the Concordia Food Collective is the parent organization that houses the People's Potato Project Collective and Le Frigo Vert. And then shortly thereafter, the People's Potato Project Collective had the People's Potato Serving Collective and the Community Economic Development Collective. So we're trying to, and working with with understanding the legalities, like how do we organize ourselves? How can we spread an organizational structure that's going to be empower more workers, that's going to give more worker autonomy? And that's what we were trying to figure out. And also, our Constitution was really, really overt and explicit in having really progressive hiring practices and policies, really enshrining non-hierarchical work structures, having good worker evaluation sort of processes, employment processes that made a lot of sense, and always made sure that those project collectives, though they were part of the umbrella Concordia Food Collective, always had the autonomy to do what they needed to do. So then there was a board, and there were the project collectives, and the Frigo Vert at that point became its own distinct identity, and we're able to now make decisions about what they wanted to carry in their store. And so at that point, I don't know, I'm pretty sure they ended their vegan policy, but I'm not positive about that. But it didn't matter because it became an autonomous, vibrant zone. And the employees who worked there were awesome, and they became part of the activist and food movement hub that existed. It was an amazing thing. Like, really, almost from one day to the next, you went from an organization that was really under the cloak of a different administration's policies and ones that weren't necessarily humanistic, and certainly those policies weren't what the employees who worked there then wanted to carry out, to being in a situation where they were fully autonomous to do exactly what they wanted to do. And it regenerated a lot of energy and interest in Le Frigo Vert. And thereafter, the People's Potato did their thing, Le Frigo Vert did their things. We worked in collaboration a lot, obviously, but we were both vibrant organizations that had a very symbiotic relationship, and that wasn't possible with the previous administration. So thereafter, all of our community economic development products were obviously found at Le Frigo Vert. So that was, our baby food, our canned goods, our cookbooks, our baked goods. They all became a very important staple of Le Frigo Vert's goods.
So could you describe the relationship that you guys had with the administration during the time that you were involved with the People's Potato?
Yeah, the relationship that we had with the university was really important. I think we really valued the administration, and I think we really recognized that the administration was the aggregate of a lot of individuals, and we worked hard to know who everybody was in the university, what role they played, and how they could help us, and to bring them on board as a collaborator in the project. I think ultimately it was our vision to have a project that was something that people could connect to and feel a part of in a lot of different ways. And when they felt that pride of the project, they would feel inclined to participate and aid it. And there were, throughout the whole university, I had mentioned earlier that there were groundskeepers, Portuguese groundskeepers, who were so excited that we were making a garden at the back of the athletics field. And Marvin Cooper was the athletics director, and he was happy to be participating in that. Jacques Saint-Amour was head of custodial services, and he was excited to give us whatever we needed to help clean the kitchens. And we're talking about, literally hundreds of dollars in cleaning supplies that he just, sure, you can have that, that's no problem. Pat Petromonaco was in charge of distribution, and he would put his truck drivers out there to pick up fruit that local fruiteries on St. Catherine put aside for us. Rick Young was head of campus planning, a high administrative position, and he worked under the vice rector services, Michael DeGrappa. And all of these people were people that we knew. We were excited to work with them, to have meetings with them, to talk to them. They were excited about our project. And we wanted to, Marcel Denis was the head of institution, the vice rector of institution here. Frederick Lowy was obviously the chancellor of the university. And these were all people. Donald Boisvert was the dean of students. Keith Prudent was his assistant. We wanted to know these people. We wanted them to know what our story was, what we were trying to do, that we were trying to aid the socioeconomic development of the university for students who couldn't afford proper meals, who were eating too much dollar pizza, to have something special happen here. And we wanted them to all be a part of it. And that was really important. And we wanted our staff to know who was who in the administration, and we wanted to strengthen ourselves and the whole university by developing those relationships. But of course, there was a context in which all of this was happening in, and that context was a very acrimonious relationship between the CSU, which was largely radical at that time, in fact, extremely radical at that time, and the university administration, and even the alumni and different factions of the student associations, such as the Commerce Administration Student Association and the Engineering Student Association. And at this time that this was all happening, there was an accreditation drive, which was very, very, very important for the union to become accredited at that time, so that they would enjoy rights provided by law in Quebec. And once the student union, the CSU, became accredited, the university became obliged to collect the fees and dues of the members of the CSU and transfer them to the CSU without any possibility of intervention. Because previous to that, the Commerce and Administration Student Association said, no, we want to collect fees from our members. And the administration was withholding funds from the CSU and passing them on to the Commerce Administration Student Association, which under the Accreditation Act became illegal. So the student union became much, much, much stronger once they became accredited, which was around 2000, which was a major, major step. And then leading up into 2001, the student union was extremely radical. There were really, really, really strong Palestinian solidarity movement at the university that was vocal and dynamic. The university was starting to show some very, very serious predilections towards supporting Zionist interests at the expense of Palestinian interests, or the Palestinian solidarity interests. A number of students were starting to get barred from campus for their Palestinian solidarity work. And there was a lot of external influences, like the alumni as well, that were starting to put a lot of pressure on the university administration to change the culture of Concordia. And at that time, people were referring to Concordia as a hotbed of Islamic radicalism and anti-Semitism and these kinds of things. And we were working very much in that context. So, for example, it's a small thing, but in September 2002, I think it was, September 2002, yeah, I think it was September 2002, Normand Lantier, who was the university fire inspector, would go through the university tearing down signs everywhere. And he'd been doing this for a number of years in our spaces. Like all of our posters at the onset of the People's Potato were handmade posters that we cared a lot about, and we'd decorate our space with them, and he would tear down everything in our stairwells. And he was always a problem that way, but he was tearing down all political posters throughout the university. And in an impromptu kind of moment, there were probably about 20 of us, from the People's Potato, from the Muslim Student Association, from SPHR, Solidarity for Palestinian Human Rights, from the Caribbean Student Association, from the Link, this huge conglomerate of people, this huge coalition of people that we just kind of walked through the university and said, let's go, it's time for us to talk to them. We went into the administration's office and said, you can't tear down our stuff anymore. You can't be doing this. We've got a right to talk to the students in this university, to put political messaging throughout the university, and you guys got to just stop doing this. It was really, really quite acrimonious. Before that, in 2001, following the September 11th attack, which really changed the political climate and really created a new kind of regressive right-wing mobilization. The alumni, in conjunction with the administration, worked hard with student leaders to create a petition to overthrow the current CSU executive, which created an election scenario, like a midterm election scenario. So there were challenges in this context, and so while the university really loved the people's potato and was really, really careful to always be on the side of free food and being supportive, and which in most cases they were, and as individuals they were, I think by the time, by late in 2002 and 2003, I think we reached an endpoint with the university where the university said, we don't care anymore. There are big issues here now at stake, and we don't care. We're not moving any further. Radicalism at this university has grown too strong. We don't care what the consequences are. We're going to nip it in the bud. And I think that led to, and that was the climate that caused what has now become called, I think, the Netanyahu riots. And the Netanyahu riots were the culmination of a lot of anger and frustration amongst these radical groups, amongst these progressive groups that were tired of this duality, this dichotomy where Palestinian solidarity groups who wanted to host events in the university were barred, and then the former head of state at the time, Netanyahu, who's known commonly amongst a lot of people as a war criminal for various actions he's undertaken as a head of state, is welcomed and invited to. And without getting too much into that event, I mean, it's important for me personally because that Netanyahu riot really spelt the end of my relationship with Concordia as a whole, because I was implicated in that event and subsequently suspended from the university, from the school. It was also critical because I think at that point, Michael DeGrappa, who was the Vice Rector of Services, under direction from the Board of Trustees and the rector, said that we're not negotiating anymore. We're not talking about any of this stuff, and that was when we were working really hard on the Concordia kitchen mosaic, and I think that's the climate in which we hit our dead end. So, that was the final point. The Netanyahu riot was the end of the game, and they, had no problem expelling a number of students at that point and kind of launching a direct attack at the CSU and different executive members of the CSU, such as Aaron Mate and Eve Engler, and I was also implicated in that. And but more so, I think before that, we started to feel a subtle shift, in terms of the relations and so on. In terms of developing our direct relationships with the administration was having a warmth to our relationships. And a really great example for me of how we tried to build that was Michael DeGrappa, who was the Vice Rector of Services. And in our world, Michael DeGrappa was the most important person. He'd risen through the ranks of the university. He had started in distribution services, I think, and worked his way up to the top role of vice rector. But he was also responsible for all space usage in the university. He was responsible for everything that we cared about. And so we wanted to know Michael, and we got to know him. And I think someone who really understood this really well was Tom Kiefer. And Tom really liked to know these people and really know how to get under their skin. He liked to have their home numbers, their cell phone numbers, and liked to call them at odd hours, liked to talk to them about which gym they went to, and I think that was really, really, really valuable. And at one moment, there was a couple moments with Michael DeGrappa that were really important in our relationship. At one moment, we were receiving the People's Potato. We're receiving an award from the Dean of Students at the end of our closing for the first year. So this would be, May 2000. They gave us the Dean of Students award for something. And Michael DeGrappa was there. And there was just like a rapport where Michael maybe was talking about our service. He said, well, I would do anything for these people because it's such a great thing. He said, well, what about a new stove, Michael? Michael, even a new stove, Zev. And sent him an email the next day. Okay, Michael, new stove's $4,000. Okay, I said I would. And so we got $4,000. He sent us a check for $4,000 or internal transfer for $4,000. And we bought a Hobart mixer, which started our baking operation in earnest. And we bought a twin 6-burner stove with the plaque there. And it was huge. We went from having, rinky-dinky equipment to real equipment. It was a really important moment in our evolution, but it came in such a candid moment. And then another moment that we had that was really, really key and critical to our development was after we moved into this kitchen, we still envisioned the 7th floor as our football field, our acre of industrial food service equipment, and we were really attached to that vision. But we were still serving the food in Reggie's, in the basement of Reggie's. So we'd come here, we'd cook our food here. It was really convenient. It was much less onerous than cooking over in the church and hauling everything over and then hauling everything back. And our fridge is right here, and we had the services that we needed here. But still, we were, every day at 11:45, we'd take our 100-pound soup pots and take them down 8 flights of stairs to the basement of Reggie's and haul everything back up here to wash. And, we were getting really fit and really buff, and it was awesome. But it was really onerous. And so what we did was we said, hey, Michael, we'd really like to honor you and have you do a serving with us. Meet us at your kitchen at 11:45. And Michael's great, we'll have the press there, we'll get you involved in that. And this is great. So me and Michael, we each grab a handle of the pot. I think they're probably about, 80, 90 pounds full, and they're burning hot. He takes one end, I take the other end, and we start down the back staircase to the basement of Reggie's. He made it 1 flight of stairs. He was beet red, sweating his ass off. He thought he was going to have a heart attack and croak there. And, after that, the conversation about opening up the servery on the 7th floor went really differently. That was easy at that point, where he said, okay, let's just do that. Let's do that. So it was really easy to build on the next steps with the university, and we were always taking those next steps. So then, once we were up here and we had, our beautiful industrial kitchen, we had our walk-in fridge, we're serving right there, and we're thinking, well, actually, we wash 350 dishes a day. We got an industrial dish pit there. Geez, why don't we use that? And it became common sense that we could use that space as well. So we used those personal connections to really strengthen our project in a way that we never felt like we needed to compromise. We always knew what we wanted. We were always going to get it. If we needed to go to the press, if we needed to serve in front of their building, in front of their offices, we would do that. We never shied away from being seen as political agitators, from doing the grassroots organizing, from serving at demonstrations, for being part of the student strikes. But we also, because we were rolling up our sleeves every day and serving the food, we knew that we had the moral authority. We knew that we could contact the reporters at La Presse or the Gazette and have a lot of moral sway. And that was our greatest strength. And of course, at the end, the overall political climate and the imperatives that the trustees were seeing changed enough that they didn't care about that. Like, I think Concordia suffered post 2002, I guess, which was when the Netanyahu riots were, or was that 2003? That was probably 2003, the Netanyahu riots. So when the Netanyahu riots came, the university, I think, suffered a great deal of public relations problems, but they wanted to put their house in order. They wanted to kind of stem out radical politics, get rid of the agitators, and just at whatever cost. So at that point, that's where I was barred from the university as well. And that's where they just said, it doesn't matter. You guys go to the press, do whatever you need to do. We're taking care of business here. And that I think was kind of the summation, that the university could really embrace it, and with the tactics that we used as individuals, they were so supportive. But when it came down to the line of what the actual political imperatives were, everything bent to that and was ruled by that. But then nonetheless, here we are, since 2003, when probably my involvement waned, 12 years later, and still here. And the space that we eked out of this corporate cafeteria, is still being run as an autonomous, worker-run collective, serving amazing, nutritious, healthy food to student populations. It's really, really amazing. And this is something that I think, in a certain way, is impenetrable. There's and as long as people care and the core collective stays tight, but the ideas embedded in the project itself are there, and they're self-evident, and they're strong. And anybody, I think, who's come and worked in the People's Potato understands implicitly what it means to work in this space, to take over a space that was of corporate control but has been liberated. This is a liberated zone, and the ideas and just the pictures and the art that you see around here is a space that's indicative of a liberated space. And I think that it's just too valuable for anybody to give up, and too hard for it to give up. And the energy that inspires outside of the walls of this room, I think, are pretty staggering and valuable and important to people. And it's you taste it when you eat the food. You taste a different ethos and a different ideology when you eat that food. And I think that's something that's going to be really hard. I mean, I know that I would guess that the collective who lives in here now and works in this space now will encounter different challenges with the administration, but the power of what happens here is so great that at any point when they're jeopardized, I would imagine that the mobilization and the efforts to support this and keep this alive will run much stronger than what the administration will want to wrestle up. And I think there's a long memory of this stuff. It's not the people who exist now running this collective that are going to come to the fore. I mean, those will be the people at the fore, but who will come to the support of what exists here. There's generations of people. Like, I live out in a very remote area of British Columbia now, and people come back home from being in university in Montreal, and they say, yeah, I go to Montreal and I'm at Concordia or I'm at McGill and I go to this place, this People's Potato. Have you ever heard of that? And people believe in it. And it's not one generation, but it's several generations now that because student generations last, 4 or 5 years? So there's several generations of student cycles that have come through this that are really, really attached to what's happened here and what is happening. And it's amazing. It's really great to see this stuff. I love the art and decoration and the implied messages that are strewn throughout the space, and the power of what it means to be a radical activist who rolls up their sleeves and feeds people every day. And these are lessons that you learn from the Black Panther Party. You look at the rise and the strength of organizations like Hezbollah. They feed people, they run childcare services, they provide services to people that people need. And when you do that, you become a force and you become a valuable resource to that society, and you change the society at the same time, for better or for worse, in different circumstances and occasions. But it's a powerful, powerful social tool.
So I guess let's start with the Bolshevik Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you could just recount from that point, I guess, to the end of what you were recounting before.
Yeah, sure, great. There was a number of changes that happened at Le Frigo Vert particularly, I think, specifically in the summer of 2000. There's a new board of directors that came on board, and they hired a new store manager. And these were things to try to revitalize Le Frigo Vert, but it went in a direction that I think became increasingly uncomfortable. The store began to carry supplements. The store began to carry frozen, pre-made meals. The store began to decide to become vegan only, so it eliminated products like organic milk, organic cheese, nice organic yogurts. It invested in a security system, and it started to have a much more corporate ideology, but based around a vegan food politics. So it was vegan first, and then everything else second. And there was no longer a deliberateness and thoughtfulness to every product that was in the store about what its politics were and what its intrinsic value system were, and these kinds of things that before had been really seminal to the life and existence of Le Frigo Vert. But the most symbolic gesture that the Le Frigo Vert made at that time under this new administration was in the fall of 2000, was the decision to get rid of the bulk bins. Because whereas before, the bulk bins in 1997 were like a 1998 probably was when they were installed, were super exciting way to build on what everything the Le Frigo Vert believed in, which was being able to make really healthful choices, educating people about how to eat properly. Removing those was really symbolic of the direction that this new administration was taking Le Frigo Vert. So what we decided to do, and we petitioned, and a number of food activists, and myself as the project coordinator of the People's Potato, I was obviously at the forefront of a lot of this stuff, or amongst a peer group of these things, but we were talking to the board of directors of Le Frigo Vert, trying to say, look, this isn't a direction that a lot of people feel comfortable in, we need to shift. But they were impervious to the petitions that we were delivering, and they felt like they had their own mandate and vision of what they wanted the store to be. So we, according to their constitution, we were able to serve notice of a general meeting, a special general meeting to elect new board of directors. And we had enough people sign off on this who were members, which is every Concordia student was a member of Le Frigo Vert, so we had a lot of students able to sign this petition. And so they were required to have a meeting, a special meeting, where we could elect a new board of directors. And we had a slate of 12 people who were the Bolsheviks, who would kind of recreate a new vision of Le Frigo Vert. And to get into the specifics of that, what it looked like was there was the People's Potato, and we operated as the People's Potato Project Collective that was an autonomous worker-run collective. And what we envisioned was an umbrella organization over us, which would be the Concordia Food Collective, that would support different worker-run autonomous project collectives. And so what we did was we drafted this constitution of the Concordia Food Collective that enshrined the rights and possibilities of each project collective, and invited the staff members of Le Frigo Vert to join the Concordia Food Collective as a project collective. And that's actually what we did. We had a general meeting of the Le Frigo Vert. We instituted a new board of directors who were the Bolsheviks, and they agreed to, at that general meeting, to join the Concordia Food Collective and to become a project collective under the Concordia Food Collective. So it was really, really an exciting moment there. And whereas before the Bolshevik Revolution, Le Frigo Vert was sort of mired under this administration, and the employees and staff who worked there were staff and employees, and they were responding to kind of an authoritarian mandate that wasn't something intrinsic to them, something they didn't value. All of a sudden they became empowered to enact their own food politics in that space. And it became another focal point of a lot of food politics activism, but not just food politics activism. It became another central organizing place of the whole political community. It became another radical autonomous space. So that was really, really exciting to again sort of, there was a misstep there with the administration that existed with Le Frigo Vert, and we were able to shift it so that it became this kind of autonomous radical place where the employees controlled the destiny of what was going to happen there. And they were all quite radical people, and then they could be in charge and in control of their own hiring processes, of how they wanted to manage themselves, how they wanted to be accountable to each other, and all of these kinds of things that are really important for workers to figure out amongst themselves.
So could you describe to me the original collective membership of the People's Potato?
Yeah. So at the onset, I think it was so important. The People's Potato at the onset was, we all had our own visions of what it meant to each of us, but it was ultimately really about the collection of us that made it what it was, because it was our sheer efforts that made it happen, and without any of the contributions that any of us made, it would have been so dramatically different. And so I think at the start there was myself, and I was known as Comrade Onion, and there was my cousin Janice Tiefenbach, and what was she? I don't remember what her name was. My cousin Janice was an art student, and each of us had our own apron, and she embroidered a symbol on each of our aprons that we were known by. So there was Mike Barkey, who was Mung, Comrade Mung. There was Jen Rasso, who was known as Comrade Smoothie. There was Marguerite Bromley, and Marguerite, for the first couple of years, was the co-project coordinator with me. So we took the lead on most stuff. The others were more involved in school and had other commitments, and it was Marguerite and I who troubleshot all issues and dealt with the administration on all issues, and bottom line, the food preparation on a day-to-day basis. So made sure that everything was clean. Like we made sure that everything was done on a daily basis. And that was Marguerite Bromley, who was Comrade Chickpea, and she was also known as Mucka Mammal. And we always had a lot of fun in the kitchen. And then there was Laura Berazzotti, and I don't remember what she had embroidered on her apron. But for example, Janice was really involved in the overall aesthetic of the People's Potato. Every poster that was made, she hand drew, handcrafted, and that was a really important part of our aesthetic of what it felt like to be in the People's Potato. That's how everyone recognized us and saw our posters and knew what we were doing. And we've got our cookbook here that she did such a beautiful job of designing and putting us out there. When we started to make all these community economic development projects and put our product out into the community, she designed all of the labels for all of our products so people knew what it was and felt what it was just by looking at it. So that was so valuable, and we had to run a couple campaigns for fee levies, and our posters were all designed by her, and she really let people know what it felt like to be a People's Potato, and she drew a potato with a crown on it, and that was the People's Potato, this idea of the proletariat being, producing for itself, of this the end of hierarchy and all that, but so subtly embodied in all of its aesthetic principles. It was just so simple and clear. Michael Barkey, Comrade Mung, was the person who coined the term People's Potato. We had gone out to Loyola to a Senate meeting to kind of talk to the University Senate about this project we wanted to start, this food service project, and try to start to build our base of support amongst the university infrastructure. And we're riding the shuttle bus back from Loyola, and we're thinking of names, we're writing them all down, and Mike Barkey said, "Oh, how about People's Potato?" And there it was. And I thought, oh my goodness, what a great name. How could it be better? And it was a really, really beautiful moment for Michael Barkey to find the name for us that we've lived by. And Michael Barkey was a quiet guy who could do anything. And we together, him and I carried hundreds of pounds of produce in pots across Sherbrooke together, and would able to infiltrate all the churches in the local community to bring us resources. And Michael would leave, and then he would come back, and he would have hundreds of pounds of stuff. And we never necessarily knew where he got it from, but he was able to talk to anybody and elicit anyone's support to contribute to us. And Michael left the collective at a certain point because he needed to do his own thing, and he would come back. And it was amazing when he would come back, and we were really, it was really amazing. And Jen Rasso, as much as we all believe that everybody had a right to food and to eat quality food, Jen Rasso believed that everybody had the right and to eat dessert. And she really believed that. And, I didn't necessarily believe that, but she really did. And she worked her ass off in this kitchen to make sure that with as many of our servings, there would be dessert served with the servings. And she was in a really rigorous academic program. I think she's since gone on to become a lawyer. She was also doing a lot of fine art stuff and performance art, and really understood the context in which we were working. But she would come in, and it was amazing. She'd have a 2.5-hour shift or something like that in the kitchen, where she would come out and make 300 brownies. And it was staggering. She would be a whirlwind of activity to make sure that everybody could have not only some vegan mush, but a brownie too. And that was really, really sensational and remarkable. Like it's a very unique contribution that was about her as a person. And Marguerite Bromley, who was Chickpea, really loved us all, and I think loved all of our volunteers and loved people in general. I'm just going to shut this down or move it far away. Do you want to put it somewhere where it's not beeping at me? Is this okay? Is this okay?
Sure.
I just want to give props and
Go ahead.
make it personal and stuff. So Marguerite Bromley, who was Chickpea, really loved us all, and she was like a very critical person to making our kitchen fun, to making those long hours that we worked about us and about having a great time and about laughing and about being silly. She was also a fine art student. She just brought a quirky, uncanny love of fun of each other. She loved our volunteers, and she brought so much warmth into our kitchen. And I was Comrade Onion, and I was Comrade in the basement of Reggie's. They painted an epitaph. We decorated the basement of Reggie's to make it a more appealing place to serve, but they put an epitaph at the top of it that said, "Comrade Onion says work harder and faster." And that was my ethic and ethos about it. But Marguerite, made it really possible for the volunteers to laugh at me, about me in the kitchen, made it feel safe and warm. All of my kind of Maoist sort of inclinations were sort of subservient to this idea of making sure that the kitchen was a fun place to be, that was full of love and enjoyment. And then that was our first generation of people, and then there was these other generations of people that came on board that also made really remarkable contributions. There was a woman, Kate Lawrence, who came in, and she ran all of our educational programming and allowed us to expand in that way. We hired Nalady Jackson, who had such a passion for food, that she cared so much about making delicious food, and it just extended what we were able to do and how we were able to do it. We hired a woman named Soledad Delgado, who was a fiery anarchist activist from Uruguay, and she kicked ass. She kicked ass in a major way, and When our collective meetings got bogged down in bullshit, she would just say, "This is bullshit. This is bullshit. Let's keep going." We brought in a woman named Sandy Sojama, who was, a lot older for us than the regular students, but she'd been through a lot of different battles, personal and otherwise, in the community. She'd been involved in the Oka crisis, and had a really lifelong commitment to activism. And at the time we were an Anglophone collective, and bringing in Soledad, who was primarily Spanish speaking, and she had a young kid, and that made us shift, and Francophone was involved in Francophone community. Sandy was perfectly bilingual, and she opened up new doors for us, being able to go and participate in civil society in Montreal. And we got some grants based on the work that Sandy was able to do with us to be a part of the food security network in Montreal. We worked really closely with eco initiatives, and there were some fantastic people who worked there, like Kevin Walsh, who was one of the Bolsheviks. When Mike Barkey left, he would mysteriously disappear and then come back with all this food. And then Mike Barkey, I think he went to India the first time he left us. But we hired in his place a fellow named Jean-Michel Sauteron, is his name. And he was a lovely, beautiful guy. And he was born on the same day as Mike Barkey, which is a lovely coincidence. And he would also just disappear with a cart and come back with a whole load of food, and espouse a whole amount of friendliness. Daryl Nunn was a fellow that we hired earlier on too, and he was a rock for the organization. And when I left, I think he took over a lot of the bottom line details of how everything ran and was maintained. He also put so much effort into publishing our cookbook and getting it out there. There's a lady that we hired, Lee Rydell, who is first and foremost a kick-ass cook, and she demanded that we operate as a place where people cooked and make amazing food, and all these people were just so incredibly instrumental, from going from a collective of 5 people or 6 people to being an organization that could do so much more. And everybody's personality was so instrumental in making it happen and evolve and become stronger and able to touch more people.
Could you describe the role between the CSU and the People's Potato?
Yeah. At the inception of the People's Potato, I think that it was utterly instrumental, and because of a really incredible culture of radical politics within the CSU at the time. So in 1999, there was an executive in place. The CSU executive in place included Rob Green, Misty Malarkey, Phil Ilczewski, Tom Kiefer, and those people, Peter Taylor was another, and these people were incredibly committed activists and radical, and they were not intimidated by anything, and they unequivocally believed in the vision of our collective. They supported us in every way possible, and they were unwavering advocates and supports, whatever it was. There wasn't anything that I would ever have asked of them that they wouldn't have done. So, we would, if we needed to unload our truck, we'd have a truck full of produce. I could grab any of them and say, "Hey, Peter, come here. I need some help unloading the truck," and they would do it. It didn't matter what they were working on. They valued what we were doing so much and were so supportive of it. Their support would reach any length whatsoever. And subsequent, executives created this culture within the school that allowed us to continue to operate, and we fed each other. It was such an incredibly symbiotic relationship, and other executive members like Sabrina Stay, who became a collective member later, and who was the president of the CSU for a short period of time, and then there were other characters around like Laith Marouf and Shadi Marouf, who were, amongst other things, committed Palestinian activists. They're incredibly supportive of everything that we were doing, of what, and it's not that they didn't have their own struggle, but we understood how symbiotic everything was and how all of us working together made us stronger. And there were so few examples of where there were conflict, of where there was issue, of where personality became an issue in terms of how we organized. And that was a really an amazing thing. Sabine Friesinger is another super, super important person. I think she became CSU president, I think in 2012 or 2013. And all of these people had so much integrity and passion and commitment and we worked so closely together, and we knew each other so well. And we obviously ate all of our meals together, and that's an important thing. But that, we're all committed. And I've been in other activist communities where you hear kind of sniping, and you're not sure about this person, you're not sure about that person. But on those executives, the executives themselves were so tight, but they were also we were tight amongst each other. Christina Zaidus was a VP for a couple of years there and was a communications assistant. Margot Brennan was a communications person. And all of these people were so incredible. Marina, I'm going to say her name wrong, roommates with Christina. And this whole community of people that we all lived and breathed and worked so closely together to make all of this stuff happen and to put the building blocks in. And, and I think that's really rare. And it was an amazing culture to be a part of at that time.
What kind of challenges came forth developing an organization that was growing?
Yeah, it became really complicated. I think we were really, really ambitious and grew the organizations a lot in a lot of different directions. We had our base service, which was serving the meals every day, and that was run by one sub-collective. And then we had another sub-collective that did the community economic development work. So the baked goods and the and canned goods and baby food and prepared foods of different kinds. And so they operated differently and met together differently and had their own meetings and organized themselves a little bit apart, and then we would come together and meet together. And we envisioned this sort of structure because there's a certain moment where we wanted to take over the whole food service operations of the university. And the workers who worked here, the Sodexo workers, we wanted to try to create a collective that could rehire them all. And that was one thing that we did. And Mike Barkey, who was good at talking to everybody, went over to the other side and chatted with them and said, you know what, we're trying to put the political screws to the university and want to, take over this whole thing. But you want to keep you guys here as workers under the same working conditions, but become autonomous. So we kind of imagined what it would be like to be able to have a lot of workers, not 10 or 11 or 15 or 18, but like, how do you organize when you're 80 workers and it's autonomously run and those workers direct the work and it's a bigger organization? And so we were really thinking about how to try to do that, which is why we split the sub-collectives out. But what we also found was that when we started at that time, we started to hire for different things. Originally, when we were hiring, the main requirement of the job was to be able to bust ass in the kitchen. Anyone we hired, they'd been a volunteer here, we'd seen them work, we knew they could bust ass in the kitchen. And all of a sudden, now we're starting to do a lot of other stuff, and we're trying to hire people who have different skill sets, who are maybe good administrators, who are good networkers, who are good at other things. And what we're also trying to do is, I think at those years, I was predominantly responsible for almost all the administration And so that created an implicit hierarchy. So, implicit in our hiring practices was this idea of trying to deconstruct the hierarchy. So, I did all the bookkeeping, I did most of the administration of the organization, the grant writing, I, dealt with most of the administration of the university. So we wanted to hire people who would take over some of those roles. And I think we became, maybe in some of our hiring practices, less concerned with the kick-ass in the kitchen part. And that created a really different politic in the organization. So whereas once we had most of our meetings on this table, in this kitchen, and we would be, talking about these key issues of what we were going to do, whether or not we were going to disrupt this thing or serve food at this protest or, do this launch this program. While we were having these meetings, we'd be cutting up bread and making croutons, doing preparations for a catering job. None of us wanted to sit around and talk. We all wanted to sit around, figure out what we need to figure out, and work and clean the dishes and maybe, make some beautiful food for ourselves to serve during the meeting. So we're making a beautiful meal for each other while we're meeting. And as the collective expanded, that happened less and less, and the meetings became longer and longer, and the meetings became sit-around meetings where we would all be in a boardroom with 18, or I think 18 was our peak, with 18 people discussing really complicated issues and discussing them not in the context of get food out to people, but in the context of I think identity politics and people's identity needing to be a part of those decisions and those discussions. And I think that became really complicated. And I think throughout the CSU at that time, there was a lot of stuff that was happening. There was a core coterie of people who had been really dedicated and devoted to pushing things forward and making things happen in a radical perspective. But there was also a lot of identity politics that were informing and also altering our methodologies of organizing. And I think certainly in the context of the People's Potato in 2002 or 2003, when I finally became necessary for me to leave, the identity politics were really strong in our organization. And I think that probably amongst a significant cross-section of the organization, their identity and how they identified and the learning that they were doing, becoming activists themselves, probably to them was more important than cooking awesome food. And so that changed, where we had people working in the kitchen who were starting to wash dishes at that sink in a way where they didn't want to really wash dishes. They were kind of frustrated and irritated that they were washing dishes because they'd rather be in the office doing something else. And that changed a lot, because I think the moment where we started to lose every single person being willing and wanting to clean the kitchen, clean out the walk-in fridge, and make this kitchen work, and had other interests, I think you lose your basis of unity. And the basis of unity of this organization, of how we ran, was at its onset, from its inception, a cooks collective. Passionate, politicized cooks. People cared about food, like Jen Rasso, who really believed that every person should have a dessert with their lunch, and that's a right. When you start to get into the idea that more ephemeral ideas and trying to make yourself passionate about them in the context of the Cooks Collective, I think we became a much more divided collective, and a collective that couldn't make decisions as succinctly and easily because the interests became so diverse and divergent. And I think that, to me, it's even worth saying that the last decision that I was a part of, or that I participated in at the People's Potato, it was also as a very simple decision, which was to hire a baker. And in that context, I wasn't on the hiring committee, but the hiring committee came back to us with some decisions, and it was a a complicated situation where we were looking at a couple different candidates. One candidate in this particular decision, and this is really internal, but it speaks to how organizations operate and how things shift. But we're looking at this decision of hiring a baker, and one person candidate was a passionate baker who had volunteered for us as a baker, who had a huge amount of baking experience, who had been a board member in our organization, who shared the passions and ideals of our organization in a very profound and personal way with us since, well, this person was from Saskatchewan. So from the moment they arrived in Montreal from Saskatchewan, had that inclination. And another person who was interested in the people's potato, didn't really like to bake, wasn't very much into cooking, was a single mom in gender transition. And so the dichotomy there was between someone who, shared the vision and values of the organization, and the other side being like, this is a person that we want to give a chance to. We want to invite them into the collective because they're a person that maybe is disadvantaged or has a different set of needs, and we want to be responsive to those needs. And so that's a really intense dichotomy, and it speaks to how organizations function. And before that, we had been extremely sensitive to bringing in people who had a similar passion to us, who came from diverse backgrounds. So some of the people I named before, like Soledad Delgado or Sandy Sajama, people who weren't part of our student peer group, who had these passions that we brought in, we had done that with. But in this particular case, the collective made the decision to hire, this single person in transition, and at that point for me, I felt like I needed to walk away because I didn't support that anymore. That wasn't part of a collective that I wanted to be a part of. There was different ideas going along there. This person was being hired to bake. They didn't really want to bake. It was a matter of time. I was away from the organization that this person tried to transition their job into a more of an administrative position outside of the kitchen. And I thought, I can't do this anymore. And in terms of the total irony of this, the person who we didn't hire at that time as a baker now runs a staggeringly beautiful, progressive, radical bakery in Saskatchewan that's an incredible operation and does the most beautiful baked goods. I mean, he's a completely devoted professional baker that uses organic materials that are milled in the bakery, that are got from all the local farmers. He's doing exactly what the vision was, and this is 15 years later, and he's still passionate about it. He was, to me, the right person to hire for that position, but the collective's decision-making apparatus didn't allow us to do that anymore. So I think that's really interesting to me, the way that, and I think if we were going to do it again, I think, something I would always be cognizant of, and in terms of how I organize too, is being really cognizant of what's our basis of unity, what's bringing us together, what are we trying to do here, and make sure that the people we bring into the collective are people that share that. And we never at the time figured out how to tier the collective. Everyone who was a collective member was a collective member, period. And so we didn't have people who were had half votes, or we were involved in some decisions but not other decisions. And we were toying with that, having a permanent collective and then a more transitional collective around that. But we never did that because we always felt like we wanted everyone's voice to be strong. But what in effect happened was people that I had participated in hiring 3 months before, were instrumental in the decisions for me that needed to make me leave, And I think that's okay because I probably needed to leave anyway. But it's a really interesting dilemma as we build our organizations, is how do we grow? How do we bring in skills that we need but still stay strong and keep our core strong and still stay focused on the tasks that we need to do. So that, and we never solved that. I mean, I would have loved, with the Concordia Kitchen Mosaic, we could have been working on a bigger project, but I haven't seen a model yet to figure out how do you organize a worker environment with 60, 80, 75 workers where everyone is empowered and there isn't a hierarchy. no, it's really, really challenging and really difficult stuff to figure out. And I think we're really committed to trying to learn that stuff. And, I guess by recounting some of this stuff, I'm hoping to maybe, give a little bit of, some of the stuff we learned and worked well for us and didn't.
So could you inform us about the relationship that the People's Potato had within the Summit of the Americas?
Right. Yeah. The Summit of the Americas, I think, was in spring 2001. And I think we had just finished serving, and there was a lot of social movements at that time. The student movement was really, really strong. And around in Montreal, there's a lot of organizing provincially. And in Toronto, there's a lot going on too. And I think we really wanted to make sure that we were part of these wide-scale, large-scale mobilizations. We thought that we had a really specialized skill set that we had developed working locally in Montreal with the student movement, with the, we were working a lot with COBP, Coalition Opposed to Brutalité Policière, and No One is Illegal, and CLAC was really active then. And we were always trying to support their work by bringing food. There was a big squat that opened up down here close to Concordia, and we wanted to feed that squat and provide food and food services for that. So in addition to having this kitchen here that we prepared an insane amount of food out of, and we also operated a program where we brought food out of the university to the street so that you didn't have to come into the university, but we wanted to be part of not just the broader Montreal community, but the broader social community, so the broader radical community, because we felt we had a real specialization in large-scale food distribution. And we viewed ourselves as I certainly did anyway, as being like a regiment, like in a revolutionary movement that would bring food services to the streets and so on. We refer to each other as comrade, whatever, and it's definitely part of our romantic mythology that was something that we brought. And there were other groups in these social movements that viewed themselves similarly. There were medic collectives that operated similarly, and documentation crews that would try to find out and ferret out the agents provocateurs or the incidences of police brutality and have documentation of them. So we became one of the organizers at some of these larger events, and we would contribute our expertise in food distribution and food services at sort of a steering level for the larger events. So we participated in some actions in Ottawa, some actions and I think the biggest one, and one that I remember the best, was in Quebec City for the Summit of Americas in spring 2011. And it was, for me, a really remarkable event, and it was also really remarkable for the collective too, in terms of a lot of interesting stuff that we had to think about and decide on. But what we did was we worked with the folks in Quebec City, and they found a space for us to work, which was at Cégep Limoilou in Quebec City, and it was away from the action and excitement of the police interactions that were downtown. And we had these outdoor barbecue burners, and we had our huge pots, and we loaded up. We had a pickup truck, and we loaded it to the gills with food, thousands and thousands of pounds, literally, of canned and bulk goods, lentils and rice and all this sort of stuff. And we also had a call out to all the other food collectives and people interested in food to bring food. So we set up this this common depository of food, and we were making a lot of food up there. And then there was another food collective that was operating at Îlot Fleury, right downtown under the bridge where there's a lot of excitement. And they were a group of kids from Winnipeg. And they were also a really passionate food collective. They didn't have the same scale as what we did, but we shared our resources and moved stuff back and forth between the different sites, with our site being the baseline site. And so we would take our food that we prepared down there. There were a lot of people sleeping around where we were, so we'd have a huge breakfast, feeding literally thousands of people, huge pots of porridge that we would serve with condiment, and then nothing during lunch, but people would congregate back for dinner. And during lunch, we would send out food throughout the city, and we'd drive it in our truck, and drive it through police lines. We wore gas masks in our truck. There was a lot of tear gas, and we would serve food to people trapped behind different police lines. And people, and the police would kettle people. It's more commonly referred to now, but it was a common practice then that police would kettle people and try to arrest people. So we were able to drive through police lines in our truck and serve people food and just rev the engine and drive out again and serve water. We had a first aid team working out of the truck doing that as well. So it was a really amazing experience in terms of saying, okay, how does this work on a bigger context? When a society changes, how do we look after people? And we see these other revolutions that happen in other societies. I mean, you see them happening where people meet and live in the city square, and it was happening in Georgia during the breakup of the Soviet Union, and in Kiev and these places. And I think we started to see ourselves being able to do that, being able to offer these large-scale food services, these logistics. And arriving in Quebec City was so interesting because we needed to learn really quickly where all the food distribution networks were in the city. And every city has their places where, all the food ends up and is distributed through the city. And at the scale that we were dealing with, we had to know that. We didn't need to go to a grocery store to get some potatoes. We needed hundreds of pounds of potatoes. We needed to find out where the depots were and get people involved. So that was a really exciting moment for us to know that probably over the span of 4 or 5 days, where everything was going down, we served tens of thousands of meals, if not more, and people were eating the food, in a variety of circumstances and situations. To the people coming back after a long day of being out on the streets and these really confrontational settings, to have this really calming, nutritious food. Like, we knew that a lot of people could go out there and be fed and do their thing. And I think, for me personally, what I recall and what ended up being a really interesting question for the collective was that at one point we got a phone call up at Cégep Limoilou from people at the Winnipeg Free Kitchen. That was their collective, that they were operating the space down there, that the police had descended on them and were arresting them and were confiscating all of their food and all of their equipment. So I jumped into our truck and drove down there and wanted to intercede and say, look, I run a soup kitchen. You can't take our stuff, our organic peas. There was actually like a huge tub of organic peanut butter. This is expensive stuff. This is valuable resource. Our huge pots, they had a backloader and were loading it and dumping it into a dumpster. And I was like overwhelmed, like that the police would be doing this. I was trying to intercede and say, look, there's a moral situation here. This is stuff that's for people to eat. You can't dumpster it. And they arrested me, and I ended up being incarcerated. So I probably left the Cégep Limoilou at maybe 8 o'clock in the morning that morning. I was arrested. I was detained for a while. Finally, the police drove me to the middle of nowhere, something 30 kilometers outside of Quebec City, and dropped me off there at 3 o'clock in the morning. The activists who were working there understood that this was the police tactic, so they were driving around the highways at night trying to find people who had been dropped off. I was found and driven to a location where other activists had congregated, and I was able to eat the lunch that Mike Barkey had made the day before, And it was so comforting for me at that point to shift from being the food service provider, making all this food, to being totally screwed over and so hadn't slept for, my 24 hours, and just in this circumstance that so many of the other activists found themselves in, and to be able to be comforted by this food. And I just felt I almost cried. I was sitting, they drove me to the jailhouse where there was a solidarity sort of picket, and I sat down there bleary-eyed and exhausted, and what's going on? Oh, there's a pot of food just arrived, and there it is, and it's the food that Mike Barkey back at home had made while I was in while I'd been in jail and incarcerated, and it was a really, personally for me, beautiful moment to be able to eat that food and experience what we were doing as an outsider or as that person enjoying that service. And then, I made it back there in time to make lunch, and it was nice to see Mike again, who kept the kitchen going there while I was gone, and get back at it and keep cooking the food. But we did the Summit of the Americas, and we did other protests in Toronto, and we did protests in Ottawa, and it's always for us an amazing experience to go into another city with our truck full of stuff, meet partners who are willing to give us kitchen space, backyard space, find places for us to sleep, and keep organizing and keep feeding people. And it really made us feel like at that time the movement's growing. A lot is possible if we can feed ourselves in states of chaos and disorder. We can undermine the capitalist system and still do well. And so much of the capitalist system depends on our compliance because we're dependent on it. If you don't go to the grocery store, where the heck are you going to get your food from? And we're really trying to figure out how to undermine that and be able to create our own provisional distribution networks for food and food distribution. And that's something still for me really valuable and really important and applicable to my life as I live it now, and work locally with farmers and part of an agricultural community where I live now, and it's a really special thing to be able to be a part of.